Order, order. Good afternoon and welcome to the Women and Equalities Select Committee. Today we're holding our second evidence session on community cohesion, and we'll be hearing from stakeholders from across our communities across the UK. And first we'll hear from Danny Stone, Chief Executive of the Antisemitism Policy Trust, and Jonny Newton, Director of External Relations at Community Security Trust. Welcome to you both. I know that there are members here that you would have worked with as well. But we also, I just wanted to say that we have 3 panels today, so we are trying to keep our answers as brief as possible. But if you do feel that there is something that we need to know more detail of, please provide written evidence afterwards if it saves you going into masses of detail, okay? All right, we okay to start? David.
Thank you. Hi, Danny and Jonny, thanks for coming in. I'm going to start off, obviously we're focusing on anti-Semitism, so maybe start with you, Danny. How would you describe the current situation for Jewish people in the UK, and how has this maybe changed over the last few years?
Can I pass to Jonny to start, just because CST collect the incidents on anti-Semitism, so it's probably better answered by Jonny.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you for the question. I think it's really important to state first and foremost, when we're thinking about the Jewish community with relation to anti-Semitism and community cohesion, to state that the Jewish community is a proud community, a proud British community, a proud Jewish community, and is extremely well integrated into wider British society. And that fits into the mission of CST, which is not only just to protect Jewish life, but also to protect the Jewish way of life. And that's not something that we take for granted, because we know from sister Jewish communities in particular across Europe that sadly it is not uncommon for members of the Jewish community to feel that they have to hide their Jewishness because of anti-Semitism, which impacts to such a level. That's never really been something that the Jewish community in the UK has to consider, but in the last 18 months it's been shaken, and we've started to see those seeds of change, and that's ostensibly because of the reaction in the UK here to the events of October the 7th and the ongoing war in the Middle East. And that effectively there's been a change in paradigm, like a pre-October the 7th paradigm and a post-October the 7th paradigm for the community. And that's for many different reasons. The community's small. There's only 270 to 300,000 Jews in the UK, 15 million globally, half of whom live in Israel. So there's a direct contact between many members of the Jewish community and Jewish Israelis. And so there's been a trauma that has impacted the community as a result of those events and the ongoing regional escalation and the conflict. And of course, there's been a significant rise in anti-Semitism. That is not uncommon. So at CST, and the Jewish community is aware that whenever there's an escalation of the conflict, it spikes anti-Semitic incidents here. What did come as a surprise in 2023 was the intensity and the amount of incidents that occurred. So in 2023, CST recorded of reports that came to us from the Jewish community of levels of anti-Semitism, our highest level, our highest annual total of incidents, which is around 4,300 incidents. And you need to take into account, I mentioned the size of the community, is the proportionate impact on the community, and that's played out in Home Office stats and police stats as well, where basically it's as if, or it's not as if, it's that a member of the Jewish community is about 10 or 12 times more likely to be a victim of hatred based on their religious identity than the next ranked community, which is really worrying. With regards to the incidents, what we've seen in the last year is a decrease in incident numbers and a levelling off, but not at October the 6th, 2023 levels. So we recorded our second highest annual total last year, at around 3,400 anti-Semitic incidents. Again, that's a significant number. And when we look at how those incidents manifest themselves, we record a few incidents of extreme violence where there's threat to life, a percentage, but quite a low percentage of incidents of assault, but the majority of incidents are around abusive behaviour. So, incidents such as a random verbal attack against a Jewish person on the street, or a lot of the incidents that are reported to us that occur online, we bracket as abusive behaviour, and that is by far the largest incident category. We also drive down into ideological drivers, and something that's really stark over the last year has been that the Israel-Gaza escalation in the conflict has been a significant driver towards anti-Semitic incidents, and as that continued throughout 2024 and to now, we're continuing to see that as a driver, where that language and that rhetoric and that discourse has been used alongside clear anti-Semitic motivation, and it cuts across all sectors. So, we've seen it in school sector, university sector, we've seen it in the cultural sectors, in the health sectors, and when we're thinking around community cohesion, which is obviously the focus of this inquiry, what we've seen is an increased marginalisation and a vulnerability of the Jewish community that didn't exist before this paradigm shift. We're seeing more the community being more inward focused, a growth of Jewish support groups across sectors, and therefore less of an opportunity for there to be good community cohesion spaces because of that, and that's led to some extent to a breakdown in some interfaith relationships, which is really sad. There's been some really good high-level, in particular Muslim-Jewish initiatives that have been announced in the last few months, and we really hope that they will be good. But there's a need for that to filter down to the grassroots in order that communities can start engaging in a more positive way. I'm going to finish now, but I also want to, I spend a lot of time talking about things that are doom and gloom and negative impacts on the Jewish community. I think it's important also to finish on recognising the strength and the resilience of the Jewish community, that there is an absolute desire and need from how we see it, that the community wants to continue with that proud and confident British Jewish tradition, and not seeing a tapering off of that strong identity. And also, I think it's also important to note that outside of that bubble of the Jewish community and the space that consumes me, I think quite frankly that the Jewish community is still held in high regard, or is thought of positively by wider British society, and that's very important. Or that a lot of people, it doesn't impact them. People are more interested in their children and schooling and education and those sorts of things, and they don't think about these sorts of issues that impact the Jewish community as well.
Thank you.
So perhaps carrying on with you, thank you for that, Jonny, and maybe Danny, you can add to this as well. Are there particular aspects of life where you find maybe there's a greater level of anti-Semitism, so healthcare or employment? And also I was quite interested in my constituency. I've got quite a large Jewish population, Southend, Western Leigh, and I was interested in the fact that there's different sects within the community. Are there any particular sects that are maybe more prone to anti-Semitism than others?
Certainly in the past, in the past, all party inquiries that I can think of have looked at the levels of anti-Semitism, and it is the case that where communities are more visible, so where you have a community that is outwardly more visibly Jewish, that they will be susceptible to attack because they're more identifiable, and that happens at certain times of the year as well. In terms of particular sectors, we at the Trust have been doing training across various sectors. In the healthcare sector is where I think it has been the most challenging. So we've run training for trusts, we've run training for Royal Colleges, we've run training for medical schools and other elements of the healthcare world. And the reports we are getting from individuals, from junior doctors, from staff, from others, is that they are feeling isolated, sometimes bullied. And again, I always try and draw this out. So the best response to that, I think, from the healthcare sector is what are the policies that are in place? How do you support people at work? And not just in respect of anti-Semitism, but what are your uniform policies, your social media policies, and so on and so forth. I did just want to say a word, if it's appropriate, on the impact on Jewish women, given the focus of the committee here. Now, we don't have Jewish Women's Aid here. I'm not a woman. I don't have the lived experience of anti-Semitism as a Jewish woman, of course, but the Jewish Women's Aid and Sam Clifford, their chief executive, are excellent, have been doing this for decades. They've submitted evidence to you, and they have seen that there has been a rise in domestic abuse and sexual violence, but so too as anti-Semitism has risen, those affected by that violence or abuse have chosen to stay at home with their abusers because of an anxiety about being out in society. There have been concerns raised about interfaith relationships and the dynamics there and the impact that the conflict has had. And when they do report, they're finding that the organisations they report to don't have the expertise or the sensitivity or the resource to deal with those complaints. So there is a gap there. More generally, intersectional abuse of Jewish women is an issue that we at the Trust have looked at and have reported on. Online, fluid ideologies we are seeing, and people have discussed this in relation to the Southport attacks. We have seen the kind of intersection of misogyny and anti-Semitism on small platforms, on larger platforms, people being primed with anti-Semitism and then moving to larger platforms from smaller ones and speaking openly in those, whether it be X or Meta or others, and I'm sure we'll come to talk about that. And as a result, Jewish women are vacating democratic spaces, and this indeed is the case for others, not just Jewish women, and that is a major problem. So the language that is used, the training that's available, and a specific understanding of the impact of misogynist anti-Semitism is important in my mind.
That's really helpful, thank you. And final question from me, just around the barriers. What are the significant barriers to tackling anti-Semitism and achieving better community cohesion? Maybe Jonny.
I mean, I've spoken about that increased marginalisation and vulnerability that the Jewish community is feeling, that can lead people to silos, and therefore there are less touch points for wider community cohesion engagement. And one of the barriers, one of the ways that it's manifesting itself is this sense of identity safety, right? So I've spoken about the significant amount of incidents that occur within that abusive behaviour space, and it's how it makes the Jewish community feel. But when I think about the sorts of barriers from CST's perspective, which is responsible for the security of the Jewish community, I think about that threat from anti-Semitic extremism and anti-Semitic terrorism that always hovers, sadly, over Jewish communities, and think about what would the impact be if something was to occur that would have potentially a catastrophic impact on the Jewish community and would deepen that sense of existential threat. So when I was thinking about today, I was this week just coming through my inbox, there were examples of 3 people were sentenced in Wales last week for kidnapping and assault of a Jewish Israeli person, where the sentencing judge said very clearly that she felt that person was being targeted because of his Jewish heritage. There's going to be a trial later this year, I think, of 2 people, possibly more, for an alleged ISIS-inspired plot against a shooting attack against the Jewish community. A 15-year-old boy from Northumberland has been arrested because of an alleged far-right inspired plot to attack synagogues. And that's always hovering. And if something like that was to happen, then that would cause, obviously, significant issues and that big existential threat. And the other thing that I'd like to draw on is bad faith actors. There are loads of really great initiatives to deepen and improve community cohesion that don't just come from the Jewish community, come from many other communities, but there are also bad faith actors that try and undermine that for as a result of I would say, their prejudices, and some of those bad faith actors can curry a lot of support and a lot of traction, and it will be good to see something that can be done around that.
Before we get on to other questions, I just want to flag that we've got votes and we'll have multiple votes. They're coming a bit earlier than we would have expected today. There we go. Bang on. So sitting will be suspended until we come back from votes. Thanks. Sorry. Women and Equality Select Committee, and we're going to resume now after those votes. We have one more vote, but I think that will be a lot later on. Just to let people know that we have consolidated this session. We will not be having panel 2 and skip straight to panel 3. So thank you very much to all of you for your patience. Thank you. David, did you have one more question at all?
Yes, I did. So we talked about the different sects within the Jewish community. Do you think, we mentioned that obviously the more, you said in your words, the more Jewish you look, the more likely you are to be targeted. So can you give us a bit more of an overview by the different communities? So if you take in my community, for example, we've got the Reform community, the Orthodox and the Hasidic community. So could you maybe give a bit more in-depth understanding of how different communities are impacted?
Yeah, I mean, we can go into some more detail. As Danny mentioned, the more you present as Jewish, the more likely you are to be a target of anti-Semitism. And, I think we see something similar within the Muslim community as well, from what I understand, that Muslim women who present as Muslim women by wearing the hijab, for example, are more likely to be targeted. So there's a similarity there. Anti-Semitism, we've done some interesting work looking at how far people will travel to target the Jewish community. And quite often, I gave an example of the person in Northumberland. He's probably quite a far distance away from targeting a Jewish community, because he's a far distance away from doing so. So anti-Semitism can just hit wherever it hits, right? It doesn't really depend on how you present with regards to the threat of terrorism. I think if somebody wanted to undertake a specific action against the Jewish people, then they are more than likely than not to look at Google and see how far they can travel to the nearest community building or location. But the broad theme is that around the abusive behaviour impact of anti-Semitism is that the more you present as visibly Jewish, the more likely you are to be at the receiving end of verbal incidents.
Sorry, just wanted to follow up. Does the data that you collect break it down to that level at all, or not? Or is it...
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Not that I know of, but I can check, and if it does, then I can submit.
And just I think Danny wants to come back in, but just before you do, I was actually quite shocked when I met with the Hasidic community, who openly just accept abuse in the street as just that's part of life. And they didn't see it as hate, they just saw it as part of life. And they said to me, well, what do you expect when we walk around dressed like this? And they just accept it as normal, and obviously we respect that that's not normal. Is that commonplace?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, that is an issue that at CST that we've been trying to focus on for a long time now. Across all forms of hate crime, we know that hate crime is underreported. According to all the data we've seen, it's around only 20% of hate crimes are reported, and that's the same, or it's likely to be the same for anti-Semitism. And some of the reasons are exactly that, is that some people shrug their shoulders and they go, well, we look like this, we look different, we are used to it, these are the sorts of things that happen to us, and it's just a regular part of us being Jewish and visibly Jewish, to which we say and which you say that that's not acceptable, and we would encourage people that do experience that to report to the police, to CST, to other organisations that can provide that support, and importantly, understand. It provides more data sets to understand the data.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up a question here, because obviously David's talked about the most significant barriers to tackling anti-Semitism. How difficult would it be to tackle anti-Semitism without a defined definition of anti-Semitism? Danny, do you want to take that?
Incredibly difficult is the answer, and we see some of the complications with it because there are alternative definitions that people throw up or try to adopt two different definitions and try and use them side by side, which essentially means take the path of least resistance is what that comes down to. The IRA definition is the globally agreed definition of anti-Semitism. It's been adopted by government, opposition parties, it's used by the judiciary, by police, footballing authorities, and so on and so forth. To the best of my knowledge, it's not been used to inhibit freedom of expression in respect to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Indeed, that's not what it's there to do. And people that use it properly know that it requires context in a given situation. It tells you what may or may not be anti-Semitic, not what is or is not. And it's a helpful guide, particularly in, say, HR places. So to my mind, it's crucial, and people should adopt, and they can always consult us on how to use the IRA definition.
What's the big difference between the two definitions that you say that people are kind of working between?
There are a few that people use. I mean, we've got a guide on our website that I can send in that gives the details on how the two definitions are different. But for example, to give you one example, one of the other definitions talks about anti-Semitism being against Jews as Jews. But of course, as we've seen in, let's say, Hungary, the anti-Semitism directed to George Soros it's perfectly possible to criticise, but it wasn't directed at him as a Jew. It was kind of more a conspiratorial anti-Semitism that wrapped itself around ideas of him and his Jewish heritage. So it's things like that, but there are many more examples.
Okay, thank you. And were either of you working in the space before the definition was agreed?
Well, it went through some different iterations. So I was there at its very earliest stages, where it was kind of a European group that had this working definition, the EUMC. So I was there in its earliest stages, and I may have been around I am really old, but I may have been there just before it, but not much.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. If you could send us that information, that would be really good. I'm going to hand over to Catherine now.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about the break earlier. Witnesses, trial of being in this place. So I'd like to ask you both how well you think the police balance the right to protest and the need to protect the Jewish community in recent process over the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Sorry.
I'm happy to start. It's obviously hugely important to balance those rights, as you say, the right to protest and freedom of speech against the freedom of religious practice, and also, as well, the public's desire to avoid disruption. When we're looking at policing of the demonstrations that have had an impact on community cohesion and have had an impact on the Jewish community since October the 7th, I think that the Jewish communal's perception, which is a negative perception of how the police have policed those demonstrations, has been informed by the earlier demonstrations, which the police themselves have stated that they didn't get quite right, including with the comms around that. From CST's perspective, policing has certainly improved of the demonstrations. There's been the process of Operation Tarlac, which is the police operation in ensuring, to the best of their ability, that the fallout from the conflict doesn't impact communities here, and that's provided a really good touch point for the Jewish community to be engaging with the police on these issues. And when you look at the protests themselves, there's been hundreds of arrests over the last 18 months linked to the protests, from public order offences through to people demonstrating support for prescribed terror organisations, through to incitement to racial and religious hatred. So there's certainly been police action there. You're referring, I think, specifically to the furore over the protest in January about the route of the demonstration there. From a Jewish communal perspective, we welcomed how the police were firm with that and the public order conditions that they put into place, because we were very aware of the the negative community impact on local Jewish communities that previous demonstrations that had occurred in the vicinity of synagogues had occurred, and we had heard from synagogues about just ongoing issues around that, a decrease in attendance, people, services being changed or times being changed, people saying that they didn't want to come into town in order to go to synagogue on that time. And we felt that the police were pretty strong, and that they were pretty reasonable public order conditions that were imposed. With regards to making suggestions, and we were advised that to get our suggestions in early for this part of the session, is that I would suggest that there's some thinking about systemizing this process, because at the moment, each time that there's a demonstration in the vicinity of a synagogue, the police will come and they will talk to the synagogue, they will talk to community organisations to assess the community impact. It would make more sense whether if there was more of a systematic approach, whereby there was some mechanism whereby demonstrations didn't take place within the immediate vicinity of any place of worship during times of worship. So therefore, there wouldn't have to be various hoops for any community to have to jump through.
Would you say the same, or Danny, or what changes would you like to see if you want to focus on that bit?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, I actually wanted to point out that after you've just heard from Jonny about the impact of the protests, and the Home Affairs Committee heard as well, there was an EDM tabled specifically in relation to the protest that Jonny was talking about in January, EDM 633, which 45 members of the House signed. And it said there has been no impact on synagogues. The Met Police are not being straight with you. And to my mind, I interpreted that as saying that the Jewish community are lying about this. This weekend, at one of the protests, one of the leading figures in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign said that the leadership groups in the Jewish community don't want us, they're speaking to the crowd, to remember the children of Gaza. And that, to me, speaks to an idea that Jews are evil and heartless. And it's demonstrably untrue. Rabbi Charlie Baginski, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, the chief rabbi, Claudia Mendoza from the Jewish Leadership Council have all talked to suffering of Palestinians. And to my mind, a bit of kindness injected into the discourse around the conflict would be important. But specifically, I have not seen direct challenge from the leadership of those groups to stop the anti-Semitic slogans and symbols and placards that have been occurring. So briefings for stewards, for example. That is something very simple and straightforward that could be done. Calling it out when you see it at a protest. Those are things that are very easy to do and I think would be very welcome.
Rachel.
Thank you, and thank you for bearing with us. It's never easy. We don't know how long we're going to end up being. What do you think is the role of social media in enabling anti-Semitic abuse and spreading anti-Semitism? And do you think this has evolved over time? Danny, do you want to...
Yeah, yes, it has, is the answer. We just did a report which, for example, showed that whereas before the Musk takeover of X, we estimated there were approximately 2 anti-Semitic tweets per Jew in the UK per year, so 500,000 per year. We now estimate that number to be 4 anti-Semitic tweets per Jew per day, so 1 million per day. So that gives you a sense of the growth of the threat. I suppose, again, you're talking about getting our recommendations in early. At the moment, we are in an embrace with the US trying to work out what is happening in respect of social media. We need to protect the defences that we have already established. So the government has signalled there won't be a rollback in terms of online safety, but I think your committee would do well to be asking about the negotiation terms of any trade agreements and ensuring that we are not forfeiting even the most basic protections in terms of, we're talking about violence against women and girls, for example. Similarly, there was no committee set up especially to review the kind of implementation of the Online Safety Act. I think your committee could play a very important part in bringing in DSIT and other officials and looking specifically at the harms that are online. I think that social media, we need to talk about social media itself, large platforms and small platforms that have high harm and do high harm, and which people are primed and then move on to the larger platforms. Again, that features in our report. AI, I don't know if I can also just touch briefly on AI as well. The language that is being used about AI is not picking up on the threats. We are not talking enough about the threats of AI. We just did a report which shows that the classifiers that are used in AI commercial systems are not finding anti-Semitic deepfakes. So I've got a picture of you see this rat as an Orthodox, visibly Jewish person. The classifiers are not finding that stuff. So I would like to see more safety by design baked into the systems. And I am worried about the levels of transparency and the protocols attached to AI in relation to government's relationship with AI. So are companies providing researchers to individual MPs? Are those companies being awarded contracts? What do we know about that? I think there's a gap there. And then I don't want to preempt all your questions, but then if I may, just because this is so important, on the Act itself, I personally think we could do with new legislation with a high-level duty of care, but at the very least, we need a bold regulator, and Ofcom is the regulator. And so far, I have seen it act in a very narrow way. Its advice to Peter Kyle about categorisation of platforms, small high-harm platforms, was poor and narrow and ignored the will of Parliament. So they said to me, we just need to look at the Act. We don't need to really take into account what was said in Parliament. I'm sure your select committee would hope that Ofcom is listening to the things that you say and the questions that you are posing to it, and you will no doubt want to question them. But so too, we need a government that is not going to roll back on protections. Ian Russell, I noted the other day, talked about losing faith in the technology secretary. I would associate myself with those comments. He said on LBC the other day that the government will try and amend the online safety provisions in a quick fashion, and there are things that could be done now, which hopefully this committee will recommend. The VORG guidance, for example, could be a code of practice. There should be minimum terms of service for platforms so we don't see a rollback like Meta has announced. And there are a whole other researcher access, minimum standards on terms of service, a whole series of things that government could do. So I hope over the next few months we will see announcements from government that despite what's happening in the US, it will amend online safety legislation to ensure we have the strongest provisions that we can.
Thank you. Do you think, though, that the social media companies are doing enough, or they even want to do enough to tackle anti-Semitism on their platforms?
No. I have nothing to add on the Online Safety Act that Danny has mentioned. But what we've seen over the last 18 months, 2 years, and increasingly so, from very high-profile, mainstream, massive social media platforms has been a rolling back of community standards, has been a completely reassessment of content moderation, to certainly not to the benefit, to the worse for anti-Semitism. So when we used to see, it was never hard to find anti-Semitism online. No. It was just scratching the surface, right? But when we used to see violent, aggressive incitement to anti-Semitism, the worst type of far right or across all extremist ideologies anti-Semitism, you'd have to dig a little bit deeper onto the fringe platforms. In recent months and years, those hostile actors, those anti-Semites, and that alongside that rhetoric and discourse and that incitement is now moving back, or has moved back, onto mainstream platforms. So it's absolutely gone the other way after, certainly CST, other organisations, not just within the Jewish community, have been working for many, many years to try and tighten that content moderation to some success, and then try and hold those social media companies to account.
And obviously it's something we've looked at around non-consensual intimate image abuse online as well, and some sort of platforms are better than others. Would you say, which platforms would you say the biggest culprits for enabling anti-Semitism?
At the moment, what is coming through are anti-Semitic incident reports. So, any given year, about 30 or 35% of the incidents that we report occur online. The caveat is that when people report anti-Semitism online to us, they have to, for us to count it, it has to be reported to us proactively, and either the victim or the offender or both have to be based in the UK, so we don't go out trawling for anti-Semitism, and the vast majority of anti-Semitic incidents that are reported into us and that are published on our anti-Semitic incidents reports occur on Twitter or X.
But of course, it's important to differentiate that X is a large platform, Meta, ones that people regularly access. Some small, high-harm platforms are designed to cause harm and to bring people to those spaces, and they are full of anti-Semitism.
Thank you very much,
Rachel. On this, I mean, I know that through your work previously, you had great success in getting anti-Semitic material taken down, and it was quite quick. Have you noticed, since the change in leadership in America, a slowness, any delays or any difference to the speed at which some of the major platforms like Facebook and X in particular are in taking down anti-Semitic material and conspiracy theories?
Yes.
I mean, with regards to X, quite frankly, over the last 18 months, we used to have quite good relationships with Twitter as it was, but we don't engage in the same way that we do with X, and it's got to the point where there's just no point in reporting it because very little is done. With regards to the other big social media platforms, I mean, I can look into that and come back to see whether. And when you're talking about a change in leadership, you're meaning the presidential change. Yeah.
There was they had in place essentially a no platform policy. There were people that they believed were not conducive to good on their platform. And of course, we need to remember this is not a public space. This is a private company which is looking and feeding through material in a very deliberate way. If you look at Stephen Yaxley-Lennon and his replatforming, the kind of offline results of him being allowed back onto X, I hope Not Hate has done work in this area, is significant offline. And with so much of this online hate, the serious concerns are about the way in which that moves offline. We've seen it in respect to the Muslim community. We certainly have seen it in respect of terrorist attacks on the Jewish community. So yes, some of those changes in approach have direct impacts to offline effects in our country.
Would you say it's no longer a safe space?
X, I think it crowds out. I think I have a take on freedom of expression, which is that if people are crowded out of those spaces, be it minorities, women, whoever it might be, it's no longer a free speech space. This is just a kind of a hateful cesspit, really.
And in terms of Ofcom, you'd mentioned about consequences and holding platforms and sites to account. Do you think that Ofcom has the teeth and the support and the resources that it needs to genuinely hold companies, these large companies, many of which are based abroad, to account?
Not really. I'd like to see them have emergency powers. I'd like to have them have stronger powers in respect of transparency. I think there should have been the potential for proper long-term criminal sanctions on social media companies that could have been applied, and I think Ofcom could do more in that space. They've got a committee on mis and disinformation that was a kind of a fudge in the Online Safety Act. It's not up and running. We don't have any further detail about it. They've got a small high-harm platform group that we're not hearing much about, and I'd like to know a lot more about. So I think there's a great job of work to do. I mean, I've said this to Ofcom as well. There's nothing I wouldn't say to them directly.
Thank you. Samantha.
I'm sort of coming at this from a different angle, but some of the things you've said today have really made me sort of stretch it out a little bit. And that is, at the minute, there is the data access bill going through. It's just been through the House of Lords. It's coming back to us. And there's some real concerns about the lack of being clauses in there for transparency. So there is this huge, bold ambition for us to be able to do incredible things with the eye, and the opportunity in this country is magnificent. But there is some concern around being able to, big tech companies being able to take what they like without saying who they are, what they're doing with it, which means that you also can't find things that have been scraped. So to Rachel's point around and CII, that becomes easier if everything's done anonymously. Have you got any views? And also I met with the Centre for Countering Digital Hate that mentioned the thing that you spoke about actually a few years ago. We spoke about having restrictions being imposed on these big tech companies that they couldn't roll back on standards. And back then it was, well, of course they wouldn't. Reputationally it'd be a disaster. But now, of course, we've seen what's happened and they have absolutely done that. So there is an argument to say that that bill should also make sure it includes provision for if you want to do anything significant that changes like that, you shouldn't have to be hauled up in front of committee or Ofcom. Is there anything around potential lack of transparency that worries you in that bill? If you don't know right now, it'd be great to hear from you later. And is there anything at all that you have campaigned for that isn't in it, that you're aware of?
I'm not familiar with the data access bill. Around transparency and online issues, around the online safety bill, the sorts of things that we were talking about was issues around anonymity. Kind of understanding that there is absolutely a space for online anonymity, but thinking that there should be a mechanism whereby if the courts or if the police needed to find out details of people who were targeting Jewish people from an anonymous account, that there was a mechanism whereby they could be de-anonymized within a safe space. And from my understanding, that wasn't picked up on.
I'll send through letters that we have sent. Antisemitism Policy Trust is part of the Online Safety Act Network, which is a group of an amazing organisation which brings together different groups that have concerns about this space. We've written to government with suggestions for amendment and as yet have not had a reply. So it may be something that you're able to take up.
You're welcome to have a look, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Christine.
Thank you. Just before I start, I should probably refer members to my register of interests before we chat. But I wanted if I could ask you, first of all, how you would assess the work of central government and local authorities in combating anti-Semitism and promoting community cohesion in the way that you've talked about. What more do they need to do?
You know, the Jewish community is in broadly a really good space with governments. You know, there are good laws and there's absolutely, with the current government and previous governments, support for tackling anti-Semitism. There have been various hate crime strategies that have now lapsed, and that would be one recommendation is to for the Home Office or MHCLG to start thinking about a hate crime strategy because they provided really good guidance and recommendations and policy details which we used to help clamp down on not just anti-Semitism but all forms of hate crime. When looking at the community cohesion piece and the local authorities are really, really important in this space, right? Because they have direct engagement and access to local communities and to schools and to these sorts of spaces where there are issues of hate crime and anti-Semitism. And I'm really glad that Councillor Sara Conway from Barnet is going to be on the next panel to talk about some of that. There are good things that occur that can be rolled out. So CST engages a lot with MOPAC, for example, the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime, on various outreach programs that we have. So MOPAC has convening powers where they can bring together communities, and we've got a program called SAFE. It stands for Security Advice for Everyone, where we seek to share kind of our niche expertise on communal security with other communities, and they provide that space to showcase that and to engage with other communities. And there's also funding that they provide for other spaces. With regards to central government, I think there's a desire for and a need for a community cohesion strategy and a proper think about this. We've outlined some of the issues and some of the challenges around community cohesion in particular over the last 18 months. I think the challenge to government is to be able to confidently define fundamental values, right? What it means to be British, what it means to have a sense of civic duty, to be part of the fabric of our society, which can be defined pretty broadly, and then underneath that there needs to be a whole load of mechanisms to start thinking about this stuff, in particular in the education sector, but encouraging critical thinking, targeting misinformation and disinformation, identifying good grassroots interfaith programs and giving them the energy and the oxygen to grow in order to start countering some of these issues with cohesion that we've been seeing.
Yeah, there was an all-party parliamentary inquiry into anti-Semitism that reported in, I think, 2015 after an intensification of the Middle East conflict in 2014. And it had some recommendations, again, I can send through, about highlighting good practice, about resource for interfaith activity, about intensifying that activity around conflict, because so much of it falls apart. I do think there is a role for local authorities in, as Jonny said, fostering this kind of civic good. The one thing I didn't mention before about the Jewish Women's Aid was they said that after the 7th of October, they had not felt support amongst fellow organisations in that sector. They felt isolated and unsupported, in contrast to the kind of the good feeling and support that there was where they came together after the Southport riots and they kind of held one another up. And so the role of local communities there is important. I think we provide the Secretariat to Lord Mann. I think he does a really good job in terms of bringing people together and trying to join up government, local government, football, other areas in respect of anti-Semitism. But also there is a job for Parliament too, and too often we see, whether it be members of Parliament or others in kind of cultural spaces, kind of engaging in anti-Semitism and a lack of challenge, and that applies to the press too. GB News has we had an anti-Semitic joke on GB News the other day. We had an anti-Semitic comment in the House of Lords. Really, like, it takes parliamentarians and others standing up and calling this stuff out across the piece.
Talked a lot there about the work which government needs to do. What work do you do yourselves with other community groups to improve social cohesion? And particularly I'm thinking about communities which are more likely to be a source of abuse than support. Is there a lot going on there?
Well, for our part, I think Jonny will have more to say on this, but for our part I do a lot of work with Tell Mama, who I think are excellent. They record anti-Muslim attacks. Iman, its director, and I have shared panels, training events, training materials. I think they're superb, and I think that's a very powerful message when the two of us are on a panel. But I've also engaged with, for example, the Sikh community over the Online Safety Act. I work with Preet Gill and others in the House to try and ensure that the Sikh community were able to engage equally in respect of the online safety and what we were going to do about it together. So different communities at different times on different things.
I agree with what Danny mentioned about Tell Mama. They're a really core and important partner to CST. We've been working with them for 12 years. There's a level of trust that we've built up over that period. In fact, Christine, we've been in meetings together with myself and Iman, and that's really important and a really important relationship. And we take the need and our desire to engage with other minority and faith communities very seriously. So I mentioned beforehand the programme SAFE, Security Advice for Everybody. It's been going for a few years now. If I get this correctly, I think we've had about 16,000 attendees to free, safe talks and webinars covering over 4,000 places of worship. And that's a really important mechanism whereby we recognise that we were custodians of quite a niche expertise around community security, and that there was the need to be able to share that in order that other communities can pick and choose from that what they would need or want in order to improve their community security. And we also have an excellent programme, and we haven't spoken about the youth sector in schools that much, but it's an important area because we've seen increased amount of anti-Semitism and hate crime within that space. But we have a programme called Stand Up, which again, for free, goes into schools. It's a collaboration between ourselves, an organisation called Maccabi GB, and also Tell Mum are involved. And Muslim and Jewish educators go together to talk about anti-Muslim hatred and anti-Jewish hatred in school settings in youth-appropriate manners. And that's a really important programme, both in displaying kind of community cohesion and interfaith work and educating around all forms of hate crime, but it can also be used as an intervention. So when there are problems within schools, this can be used to come in and engage with people in an appropriate manner about those issues.
That was actually going to be my last question, and you've covered most of it about the role maybe that schools can play, but I wondered if there was anything else. I mean, you've talked about how going into schools can help, but is there anything you think that the schools themselves or education generally can do, what role they can play?
Yeah, I mean, we had some interesting conversations a few years ago with an academy trust in the Midlands about embedding kind of anti-Semitism education within the curriculum, which I think is important and is more of an innovative way of engaging in this issue, especially, you know, when I mentioned that the Jewish community is so small, it's quite geographically isolated, so there's not, you know, many school children will go to school across the country and never have anything to do with any Jewish person or engage with Jewish people just because of where they live. So that was a really interesting and an innovative idea. The curriculum is very good at doing Holocaust education, and that's really important, and there's a huge amount of value to that, and absolutely should be encouraged. But I kind of, you know, looking at the anti-Semitism within that, we would hope that there is also a focus on contemporary anti-Semitism, and that people that are providing that Holocaust education in schools aren't stopping at the Holocaust, and therefore it being something that's consigned to history and doesn't impact Jewish communities nowadays.
Is this not something Lord Mann looked at specifically in his report?
He did in relation to Outward Academy. There's also just been a commission on countering conspiracies in schools, which has some useful recommendations, but found that, you know, the more that children are in this online conspiracy space, the less trustful they are of teachers and what have you, and the kind of formal institutions. So there's a real job of work to do in this space.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I just wanted to ask, so in terms of, you said about education for the Holocaust, that schools tend to do that very well. Do you think there is a need for talking about religion and cultures in a way that isn't always just negative? So, for example, always talking about Jewish community in the context of anti-Semitism, or talking about the Muslim community in the context of Islamophobia. Is there a space where schools need to do that a bit more proactively, or perhaps maybe leaders and others need to do that?
I haven't assessed, you know, how schools celebrate diversity and celebrate other faiths, but I assume that we're coming to the end of a panel, and I think that's a really good place to come to the end, is because it brings us back to what I was saying at the beginning about that confidence of the Jewish community, and it shouldn't be framed by vulnerability, and it shouldn't be framed by attacks against the Jewish community. You know, I'm really proud of being Jewish. We've just had a wonderful celebration of Purim, which I was talking to David about recently, where, you know, it's a joyous celebration where people dress up and have lots of fun, and there's a lot of joy within Judaism to be celebrated, and I think that would be very helpful to shift that dial, yes.
So I entirely agree. You know, last time I appeared in front of a committee, it was around Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and I offered them all honey cake. It's just been Purim, and we have a special type of biscuit, so I pledge to get every single one of you the special Purim biscuit. There's, you know, Jewish member of Parliament who dressed up as a pickle.
You did dress up as a pickle, yes.
You know, there's some brilliant stuff that Jews have a lot of a depth of love and celebration and fun, and it is so enjoyable to talk about it. This is the hard stuff. We have to do this, right, because we want to protect the environment in which we do all of that. But yeah, there's a lot of joy to be had, and as I say, that's my pledge to you is Purim biscuits.
Thank you very much. I think that is a good place to bring this panel to a close. Thank you very much for your patience. And I should put on record that that Member of Parliament completely rocked the pickle outfit. So thank you very, very much to you both. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that.
We're going to move straight on. Very much. We thank you very much for your patience, Kelly and Sara. Thank you. Very much appreciated. I'm going to hand over to David.
Hi, thank you both for coming in today, and sorry about the delay. How would you assess, getting straight into it and looking at anti-Semitism to start off with, how would you assess the work of central government and local authorities in combating anti-Semitism and promoting community cohesion? And what more do you need them to do? Who would like to go first?
Go
ahead.
I'm okay to go first. Thank you very much for having us here. So I'm here as the LGA's Community Cohesion Champion. I'm also a Barnet Councillor, and I think it's worth giving that context. Barnet is 14% Jewish, 12% Muslim. So obviously there is a lot of practical experience that we have dealt with, particularly since the 7th of October. I think what I'm going to say about anti-Semitism is relevant to local government as a whole, that councillors and councils are there in that convening, holding role, particularly at moments of crisis, but always in terms of the relationships, similar to you as MPs, but different because of the concentration focus within a ward, of having those voices and that trust to reach out to people, which is really critical at a key time. And I think that's why you need the national level of policy and the right framework and the sort of things that was talked about just before by CST. But also you need that very practical experience locally, and to be able to sit down properly with your communities and have full and frank conversations. I would also say, I know you've asked about anti-Semitism, but the same goes for Islamophobia. I was aware of the conversation around the definitions, and it's been very important for us locally, and is for councils across the country, to be able to have those conversations with all our minority communities. The robustness that is needed, and to be able to convene and hold space in local communities with the support of a central government framework is vital on all of these issues.
Absolutely. Kelly, would you like to add anything in particular? What more do you think needs to be done by central government, maybe?
I think that, and I'm from the Belong Network, and so we are a membership organisation that is supporting cohesion and integration efforts across the UK. Our members are all working on the front line in and across communities, and certainly the challenges in terms of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have been felt acutely by many of our members, because obviously a lot of those are also working with faith communities. So this is one conflict, if you like, in particular with what's been going on in the Middle East, that we know that our members have really felt that. It's been incredibly challenging at that local level, and the reports that we've had from our members is that they've almost seen the collapse, as we heard from colleagues previously, the collapse of interfaith work at that local level, and the increasing challenges of seeing the same faces that will appear to engage in the interfaith dialogue type work, but increasingly finding it difficult to actually really reach out to communities because of the pain that's being felt and the challenges that have continued. And I think in terms of national government, it sort of speaks to the wider issues, I think, around cohesion and the call certainly from a Belong Network perspective for a national cohesion strategy. I would very much like to echo what Sara says there. We feel that it's absolutely critical that we get that national leadership from central government, whilst a lot of social cohesion relies on local actors and relies on that local leadership and those local civil society organisations. At the same time, we need to have that national guidance in place to ensure that we're getting that strong leadership from the top. And I'm sure that we'll have the opportunity to talk about that further, but I think along with that, it's the resourcing of that as well. Again, Belong knows through our members that actually, you know, where the resources are in place and where there are organisations that are able to work in that cohesion space, it can have a huge impact for not too much investment. So that's something that we're calling for very strongly from a Belong perspective.
Okay, thank you. And you would have heard us ask this question to the previous panel, but what role do you think schools can play in tackling anti-Semitism? And also, looking beyond that, what role do you think other community groups can play in working together to build greater social cohesion? So maybe you first, Kelly, and then Sara.
I think, and again, I know that you heard this from the previous contributors as well, the role of schools is absolutely critical. I'm very conscious that schools are often the front line, particularly for young people, and we call them so often, I think, to play a role in targeting lots of different sort of social harms, if you like. But I think particularly in terms of any social cohesion efforts, schools are critical players. And whether that be through building young people's abilities to think critically, through initiatives that can help to link young children and young people across difference, across faith and so on. There are so many opportunities, and obviously building that into the curriculum as well. And we know that through some of the members of our network, through organisations like Protection Approaches, who are doing that work to build critical thinking in young people. We know that other organisations are working to equip young people with the skills to hold difficult conversations, to actually be able to engage in a safe way and have difficult dialogue. Because increasingly in this world, we're finding that young people are being drawn towards polarising narratives, and actually they've got to get the confidence, and we've got to be able to equip them to be able to handle that and learn to disagree agreeably, I should say. So important that we're building young people's abilities to do that. And I think that applies to anti-Semitism as alongside lots of other different types of difference as well for young people. So yes, schools are absolutely central to those efforts.
Thank you. And maybe Sara, how other community groups and other members of the community can help with the fight.
I had a couple of other points to make as well, if
please,
that's okay.
Absolutely,
and then I'll come on to that bit too. Obviously, the decision to stop funding Prevent officers has been incredibly difficult, and the timing of that for communities in the past year or so has been, and councils has been really hard. I know locally we made the decision to carry on funding that officer because it's absolutely vital, and I think sort of structurally at the national level there needs to be a dialogue around this, and I think you're all here to help with that, between the local government department and the Home Office on that, because on the one hand, if you're looking at a cohesion strategy, but on the other, where are you going on countering extremism at the local level, and the Prevent officers are absolutely vital to that. So I think it would be a sensible area. I think with everything, and just going back on the previous question as well, it's about collaboration and co-production. You need that at every level, in the communities, with local government, with the mayors, and nationally as well. So it's that whole framework pulling together. In terms of the actual school space, I think from all of our community listening following the 7th of October in particular, what concerned me greatly was that it wasn't a space to be able to say anything. And actually people were self-censoring themselves, and then you've got all of those feelings, and where do you go for that? And some of that is, how do you then keep schools and school pupils safe when they come out onto the roads, onto the buses, if that is all unable to be discussed properly with all the conflict resolution skills, and then to agree disagreeably, as you said, or disagree agreeably, I think it was, yes. that becomes a real issue. And then, you know, I know we've talked about social media here and we'll do more. You lose all of those skills. So actually all of the leadership that different communities are able to do to go into those school spaces together. I know some of the examples were referenced. I went to see Solutions Not Sides in a sixth form college recently, locally. And I think that ability to be able to have an Israeli and a Palestinian in the room and to have those conversations and to equip people to be able to discuss things safely. I think faith leaders, women leaders, etc., have a real role to play on that. I last night was actually at a mosque, at a Jewish Muslim women's event, and I think that kind of leadership that is difficult to be doing still at the moment is absolutely essential to our communities. I think there will be photos shared of that and whatever, not in a sort of a publicity way, but to sort of show leadership. It is possible to be in spaces, and we have a duty, all of us, particularly a convening role as local government, to help hold those spaces, and schools are integral to that.
Just out of interest, the event you talked about last night is the perfect example. What was the engagement level like there? So was it good attendance? Was the attendance pretty much split between the two communities, or?
So yeah, I think in all of this space, it's about the care for our communities, isn't it? And I mean, you'd expect me to say this, but local government is very well placed to do that locally, and multi-faith institutions, etc. With that, and I think what works best, particularly at a difficult time, is to have a core group of people that know each other well and that they bring people into that space. That there's something about the spirit in which all of this is done that works for people or doesn't. You know, we said prayers together, we held a candle together, we've done that several times. We even did that very early on where there weren't really the words to say. It's about being able to hold those spaces, and I think that central government needs to work with local government completely on all of this. Cohesion is our bread and butter. It's what we do without even thinking about it, really. And you learn so much from the communities that we're all honoured to represent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Samantha.
Hello, sorry I missed your coming into the room. Quick question, because data suggests that some people are feeling like multiculturalism actually isn't working. What do you think is driving this feeling?
Shall I?
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. Sorry, it's a double act that we've not done before. So, yeah.
I think times are hard, resources are scarce, and there are divisive narratives that are driving people to look for people to blame. And increasingly, that is certainly something that we're picking up in the work that Belong is doing. We're actually working in 9 of the areas of the 27 that were affected by the violent disorder that took place last summer. And increasingly, this is a theme that we find coming through. You know, when we're going and having conversations with communities right the way through to speaking to local leaders, this idea that actually multiculturalism is failing in one way or another. And I think it's a narrative that is deliberately being driven, particularly through social media. And, you know, a quick anecdotal example that we had recently in a city that we were working in, we had a case whereby a recent increase of Nigerian students into an area, those Nigerian students who actually are bringing economic benefits into the city, moving into accommodation in the local area, and a narrative that's taken hold is that these are asylum seekers or immigrants that have come in and are actually buying up or are benefiting from local housing stock and driving up the prices of rent in the private rental sector. So it's just an anecdotal example of the way in which people are starting to pick on the other, and that we're seeing increasing cases like that. And a Hope Not Hate report, I know that they were mentioned earlier by previous contributors, but you know, economic pessimism, in their report Fear and Hope that they released earlier on this year, they talked about how economic pessimism has been exploited by right-wing, extreme right-wing influences, with 52% saying that multiculturalism isn't working, and that there's been a 61% increase of tensions between different groups. So it really is a challenge, and it's certainly something, as I say, that we're seeing come through in our work.
And on that topic, you talk about right-wing influences, but would you say that there is the anti-immigration rhetoric from politicians reflects anti-immigration sentiment, or is it driving it? Or
I think We're hearing that certainly, that rhetoric is certainly being driven by extreme right-wing actors, and we certainly hear that. And there's no doubt that I think that what politicians are saying, certainly at a local and at a national level, and I will say that's actually from across the piece. It's not necessarily just one particular group, but that is a repeated theme that Belong are identifying in the work that we're doing in place. So there's no doubt that fans the flames in terms of the challenges that are playing out at that local level.
Thank you. I guess I'd add on to that. That these things obviously don't happen in a vacuum. There's a very organised operation behind this that's very well resourced, and I think it's beholden on all the other voices to be there. And again, I think local government has a key role and has a role sort of as part of the national dialogue, but also within local areas. It's all about, again, holding the space for awkward conversations. I think it's really important. Councils say we listen. It's also about having the conversation. Again, locally, we've done a lot of listening and conversations so that we understand where people's fears are coming from, where these ideas are coming from, and can talk that through. Also, obviously, you need to look at cohesion in the round, as I'm aware that we've put in our submission with housing, with the economy, etc. It can't just be that you have a cohesion strategy, as welcome as that is, without funding local government properly, without funding things that are needed properly, and enabling some of these grievances to fall away. But I think it is through that collective discussion and really hearing people and what they're saying and be able to respond quite robustly that really matters. And that will vary from area to area. The nuances within that, again, is where I find it really interesting within the LGA to hear from different voices in rural areas, northern, etc., because you then get that perspective in the round and that understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Sorry, Kelly, did you just...
Sorry, I was just going to add one point as well and say that the single biggest area of training and support that we are being asked for at the Belong Network is around counter-narrative. And it's really interesting because I think for many years, organisations like the ones that are part of our membership network will talk about the need for democratic dialogue and wanted to see conflict resolution approaches. But I think increasingly, people are feeling really stretched with the narratives that are going on and with the extreme pressures that are coming in, if you like, from those political narratives. And it was quite interesting because in a recent conversation, we were talking about this and about the benefits of putting counter-narrative training and programmes in place. And somebody was saying, actually, it should be us and it should be government, it should be the politicians that are holding that narrative. And actually, it's for those opposition, if you like, to provide that counter-narrative. And that should fall on rocky ground because actually we should be trying to drive a narrative that is cohesion-focused, that is about protecting and building resilience in our communities. And I think that's one of the single biggest sort of themes, if you like, that should underpin our drive to want to see that national cohesion strategy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Samantha. Kirith.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a little bit more around local authorities. So I suppose it's probably one for you, Sara. What steps do you think local authorities need to take to improve community cohesion, and what role do you think different stakeholders need to play in promoting community cohesion, such as schools, police, etc.? I know you touched on some of this before as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So I think there's so much going on already that, again, I was at a meeting at the LGA yesterday of the relevant board, and that there is a need to be sharing and showcasing learning, of which we've got a list in the evidence of what's sort of already there. And then with the... those conversations that happen to then have those discussions with national government as well, that it needs to be everybody together. In terms of locally, obviously collaboration and co-production with communities is really important, but the funding and the resource has to be there. It's not something you can just sort of wish happens. And the barriers locally to be doing that can be very large. I think that there is also, just to talk locally, we run restorative justice, which has been very helpful between some of the schools. We also are doing, so we were targeted as an area last summer and we had a protest, a counter-protest, all of that sort of thing. The community's response, again, communities know their areas best, and through good dialogue with local government is really important. They've responded with an actual quilt that they're crafting locally, etc. And we'll be doing a digital online version of kind of all of the events that are around. Your last session ended very positively, and I think that there is, picking up also what was said here, that there is a need to push back on a lot of this, and a need to collaborate and work with local communities and central government obviously as well, on the very real stories that are happening in a community, that it's not just all the negative, that actually if people know of everything and can see visually the events, the groups, everything that is happening, the care for place that local government and communities are, you know, intrinsic to delivering, that is a really powerful thing, but it needs resource to do that.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything there, Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, Borough are actually working with local authorities as a partner in helping to not only just provide that sort of that local engagement and act as that impartial third party, engaging with communities, but we're also helping to devise social cohesion strategies at that local authority level. So it's very much a theme that we're involved in at the moment. And what we're increasingly finding when we go into areas is that because this is, you know, subsequent many years of cuts to local government funding settlements, means that things like youth services, things like social cohesion have too long been seen as the nice to haves, and they're the first things to be cut. So when we've been going into areas and we've said, okay, well, you know, let's look at your starting point, what do you have in place? You know, a social cohesion effort from a local authority might look like one officer if they're lucky, and actually that individual is responsible for trying to almost you know, mend society and pull the fabric of society together. It's an incredibly difficult task. So, you know, I think support and services have been hollowed out, which is obviously what Sara sort of comments on. So I think this is also where I'll make the case for the civil society organisations as well, because, you know, what we will see is that it's those organisations that have actually been doing that vital work of social cohesion in communities. So I think it is very much about getting that longer term sustainable funding and commitment to social cohesion from an authority's perspective, but also recognising the opportunities with partners in local areas, because actually so often they can be there, and if treated as a trusted partner in this work, they can help to deliver really effective results just with a little bit of investment and support.
Thank you, Kirith. Just quickly, I wanted to dig a little deeper in terms of schools and police. Do you think that there's enough being done, Sara, in that regard, particularly around education, for religious education and cultural education? We know is patchy from school to school. Is there areas that we could see improvement of that? Maybe Kelly would be better to answer that one.
So, sorry, to start the question again, Sara.
Around religious education, is it suitable? Is it adequate? Is it patchy across the country?
Yeah, and I think this is part of it. I think that there's differentiation in terms of what is being delivered in terms of religious education and whatever else. But I think it's also about being really clear on what we're asking schools to do now as well, because as we've talked about in terms of, you know, the proliferation of social media, the rise of online harms, all of those things, you know, there's a broader question here which is about whether or not our schools are fit for purpose in terms of their ability to be able to tackle this and to be able to deal with the scale of the challenge, because schools are not just dealing with what they're doing in the classroom and what's happening during school hours. It's everything else that's going on outside of that and all of those other issues as well. So I do think that there's a role there for things like religious education, but it's something different about, as we say, building in the ability to think critically, just having a sort of a look across the piece in terms of education and making sure that we are genuinely helping schools to build conflict resolution methods into everything that they're doing in education, because increasingly our young people need them.
Thank you. Sara, I'm going to ask a bit about the police on this side of things.
Yes, sorry,
about policing.
You mentioned police,
We'd heard from the previous panel about the level of underreporting in terms of hate crimes especially. Do you think there's a lack of understanding from the police around hate crimes, and particularly with Islamophobia, the lack of definition, meaning that we're not actually capturing the levels of Islamophobic hate crime correctly?
I think on your second bit first, if that's okay. I was not shocked, but I think it shows the level of the issue. Yeah, it was shocking. I was in a mosque a while ago and someone spoke to me about his wife, who was wearing a hijab, was standing with her 2 children, and a car sort of drove towards them and moved at the last minute. And that went, bless you, that went unreported. And that is a level beyond, no hate crime is okay, but that is a level that is deeply concerning. It probably won't surprise you in the borough that I'm in, that we have brought community groups and the police together, and that we've been having those conversations. And kind of the bit that I think everybody is very agree on, there's been a lot of agreement, is about the actual prosecutions and things like that. So I think it is one thing that to encourage the hate crime reporting, which is important, but it's also very much then what happens sort of with the courts, etc. And it's also to create an environment where people are heard and listened to. Bless you again. Again, what we've tried to do from listening to communities is that, so Hate Crime Week happens, but we're having a year-long conversation, and that conversation is around community connections. It's been co-produced and branded with the community. It's on the positive, and it's not to sort of say all of that doesn't happen, but it's to create a different space for those conversations to happen. So in terms of our local police, they're very engaged and very involved, and there's a lot of full and frank conversations. And I'm pleased you touched on police, because I felt it was part of this that was missing. They are absolutely critical local partners, and the Safer Communities Partnership Boards, etc., need sustained and clear funding, and there needs to be, again, that framework and that collaboration. It does happen, but there should be a consistency, and some of the way you do that is with properly funding it, with sustained funding over several years, with sharing what works. Sorry, it's a very long answer, but I'll just reference as well that we were London's first pilot in Barnet, but there are examples across the country of Clear Hold Build, which is a very police operation targeting serious organised crime. So the police do the clearing bit, and the holding and the building is together. And I personally think there is a lot of learning and good practice within that from different areas across the country, very much with local government at the heart of it, of how you build and sustain collaborative relationships on the ground, also with the voluntary and community sector and with residents, because it's all about connection and trust, this. So it takes resource, but it takes those relationships very strongly as well.
Thank you. We have some other questions, but we are sadly running out of time. But what I will do, particularly around the social media questions, we'll write to you if that's okay. And if you can provide written answers, that would be really helpful. Kelly, did you have anything to add quickly on the police side of things?
I'll just quickly refer to a case study, if you like, of one of the local areas that we have been working in. So we've been working up in the city of Sunderland, and I just want to echo Sara's point, really. We recently held a cohesion summit whereby we've been doing some of that engagement at that local level, working with the different statutory partners, bringing them together, but the policing sort of element being key to it. And like many areas that were affected by the violent disorder last summer, the police bore the brunt of that in terms of that violence. What they have done subsequently, they've been doing their own engagement work out on the streets of Sunderland, engaging with residents and so on. And we felt it was absolutely critical to bring them in as part of that wider piece of work. And it's been incredibly successful in, I think, highlighting how when those different entities are coming together, the local authorities, the university, health provider and so on, and along with police, it's actually looking at how do we build cohesion across the piece. You know, this is not just the job of one desk officer. This is a role that everybody needs to take responsibility for. And so, yeah, it's the role of the police was a really, I think, great example in that work.
Thank you both, and thank you very much again for your patience with us today.
Thank you for having
We really appreciate it, and your expertise in this area. Thank you very much. That brings this session to a close. Order.
Thank you.
Thank you.